achieved from the first tier of mandates, how much it would save?
We can't even guess.
Okay.
I mean, we can't even guess. But think about taking your business. I mean, take Dayton Daily News. Suddenly doesn't have the same operational requirements that might be put in place by law. And you can reduce some staff, and you can reduce some compliance standards and things like that. Suddenly you don't have some of the same overhead because of that. I think it's very difficult to quantify, but as universities can be a little more lean and nimble in their operation, I think it's fair to say money will be saved. It also, the whole concept of enterprise is intending to inspire the entrepreneurial spirit of universities as an enterprise, not just as a place with lecture halls and professors and notebooks, but I mean an enterprise not dissimilar to what Christine Poon talked about, where they partner with business, where part of the education of the student is more than just the lecture hall, but it's working in a business, being part of the co-op programs that we hope to expand on, things that teach people through more than just book learning. And that becomes kind of a business enterprise unto itself. We hope that we meaning all of us at the Board of Regents and all of us within the university system who I talk to regularly, hope that right now we're trying to engage in an exercise of visionary development. We're trying to create a vision for the university of next year and tomorrow, one that is going to meet the needs of Ohio and make us kind of move out ahead of other states that we compete with. It's better than standing still. I'm even confused by some of it, and I wrote most of it. But it's better, although Spence and Brady had something to do with it, those young guys in the back there, some very bright young people who were engaged in this discussion with us. But again, looking at what they do in other states, looking at what appears to work well, we've tried to incorporate some of those ideas. Louis Parenza pointed out the Hope Scholarship Plan. That was enacted 30 years ago. Now, from an appropriation standpoint, they're cutting back on it. I think it's a mistake for Georgia to do that. But the point is, it's brought Georgia a long way in terms of its economic competitiveness. And Georgia Tech and the University of Georgia, I think, are in the top 10 or 12. They're ahead of us. It's pretty amazing.
What kind of impact do you think this is going to have on tuition for students? Will the universities get freedom from tuition caps, or is that something that the legislature would decide?
I think the legislature has to decide that, and it would be my view. That's not really responded to so much in the book, except it's clear that the tuition caps currently in place are here for fiscal 12, which is at 3.5%, fiscal 13 beginning next July 1, another 3.5%. That's the cap amount. If you're a community college, you have $200 each of those years. That's it. And having been around the legislature now for about 32 years, I don't know that they'd ever be willing, and they've suggested to me they'd not be warmly embracing the notion of giving up that power. So I think we have to live with that recognition in mind, that they're going to have the final say on what can be done with tuition. And I hope that the legislature continues to exercise its authority to keep tuition under control. The whole enterprise notion is one that I hope is something that causes there to be a little bit of a cost control in the accelerating costs that we see of university education. I know we had a question from one of the trustees earlier in the day, and he said that, the state keeps cutting its share. State used to pay 60%, and now they pay 25% roughly of a year's tuition. I would suggest to you only very, very infrequently has the state, in the 31 years I've been watching it, cut its appropriation to higher ed. We had a couple of lean years in the late 90s, maybe early 21st century, where that was frozen or maybe a very low cut. This year, of course, was the first time there was a significant cut, and that's because in order to avoid a cut in the last budget, they used stimulus dollars, which never came back, which we know. So that's been the reason for the cut now. But the cut is not as significant as would suggest 60% to 25%, because the university's costs, overhead-wise, have grown to the degree that they need to increase tuition, and their operational costs are increasing disproportionate with the growth in any of the state's assets. The state's assets rely on taxation. Its appropriation is part of that component, and that revenue has not grown to the degree that the cost of operation of universities has grown. What I'm getting at is the enterprise concept is intending to help the universities function in a way where they can control their own costs through their economic activity, through their enterprise development, through their entrepreneurial inspiration. That's a great phrase. You want to write that down? Quote, entrepreneurial inspiration.
Obviously, universities are concerned about giving up any of their SSI. I mean, are you formally suggesting 10% for that top tier? And are you going to establish, is part of the plan going to be a floor for base state funding? I mean, can they be assured that their base funding is not going to go down?
That's still up to the General Assembly. The plan itself, let's go back to the basics. They've asked for, aggressively, I mean, the universities have said time and again, get rid of these mandates. They're really slogging us down. We can't do the things we want to do. We can't be enterprise-driven. So the plan is we get rid of virtually all the mandates. You know, up front we get rid of some with no sacrifice on the part of the universities. But then we move to the next phase. Mandates that the university, that the General Assembly seems to like, you know, controlling board authority, they seem to like it. The value of it, we can debate it, but they like it. But the General Assembly, if they were to pass this, would be saying to universities, we're willing to give that up, but in return we want you to help fund, by your investment, you're not going to lose this money, but by your investment we want you to control your costs as an enterprise more fully. We want you to generate revenue as an enterprise more completely, and those costs that you currently continue to see growing, bring them down and use part of your SSI money as an investment in more scholarships.
But would they be assured, would they have any ability to predict future state funding? I mean, would they be protected at all against?
Have they ever been able to predict future state funding?
Clearly not.
I don't see the General Assembly saying, we're going to give you a guarantee.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just being practical here.
Okay.
Maybe I'd like it. I mean, as Chancellor of the university system, I might say, sure, it'd be great to have a 10-year contract, part of the enterprise agreement that we talk about, where we not only guarantee your enterprise status and the relief from mandates, but you promise us that you're going to hit certain benchmarks, work toward those aspirationally, and we basically then say, then great, we're going to guarantee you X number of dollars per year, rising at the rate of inflation plus 1%. We're not going to do that. Can't do it.
Just as a continuation
It's a
of
nice
that
idea.
thought, is there flexibility built into this program that if there is an economic downturn again in the future, and there is another significant cut, that portions of this might have to be shelved?
That's a pretty good idea. It might be what has to be shelved is the component of the merit scholarship plan. Again, when we get into the real weeds of specification, I have to kind of say the purpose here is to engage in discussion. The legislature said to me, you know, back when they passed this thing, and I kind of looked at the language and thought, what do they mean here? Present by August 15th a plan for charter universities in Ohio. So I began scratching my head and thinking of what we could do, and talking to Spencer and talking to Brady, talking to Kim, talking to Gary Cates. What do we do? What do we think? What do we come up with? How can we be visionary? And this is what we've come up with. And I think it's got a lot of merit, but it is all simply the beginning of the conversation.
What's your sense on timing? When would the legislature take this up, or when would you hope them to pass something?
The fall is going to be pretty quiet, you know that. So I'm hoping we can maybe get a hearing even this year. But with the beginning of 2012, we really begin an active legislative cycle so that we can pass it by May 1st. And if we do so, then we can get the process moving so that we have something in place for fiscal 13.
And is this plan what will become legislation, or do you think there will be changes to this before a bill?
It depends on the sponsors. I mean, I can't tell the sponsors what has to be in the bill. We want to get the best sponsors. Jerry Stebleton was sitting there. He'd be a great sponsor. He's chairman of education. Peggy Lehner, my dear friend, one-time state chair of my campaign for governor. I would love Peggy to actually look at this and think, yeah, I'm going to take it as is, but if she wants to change it, she's the sponsor. She gets to do it.
So you foresee that lawmakers will be changing this when it
I
comes to
imagine
form, rather
so.
than you proposing changes at.
But I can sit down at any time with any group of legislators because I've tried to learn what I can. We've a lot of resource information is in here too, what they do in other states and things like that. And the stuff that's in here, I've read so much more than that. I've just read till my eyes are blue. They're green, actually. But there's a lot of ideas out there, and what I can at least do in the discussion now being open is advance ideas. Again, there's no question that we need to have a vision for where we're going to take the universities 5 and 10 years from now.
Chancellor, I want to ask really momentarily. I'm Mandy Trimble.
Hi, Mandy.
from
Of course, I hear your
WLSU
name. I
News.
hear your name all the time.
I want to ask momentarily about transparency. Are you concerned at all about institutions not being as transparent by giving them, these are
No.
public institutions, giving them more control and less oversight?
They have more control, but we've told them from the beginning there were a number of things that are really not on the table from my perspective. I will advocate against, and it is not included in the plan, that we diminish in any way the standard for open records and open meetings. I think that's part of a standard for governmental assets, and it's one that will continue. Coincidentally, tongue-in-cheek, I point this out, a lot of the universities wanted, and they put it in their request documents, they wanted freedom from the Attorney General's control over their litigation and the Auditor of State's control over their audits. And I said, having been the Attorney General and having been the Auditor of State, I don't support either of those. So I've kept that off this table also.
So what was the thinking then behind the two provisions that are in here that deal with executive sessions? Opening the door for more meetings behind closed doors.
I think essentially what the language there is consistent with what is available now in terms of executive sessions for governmental units, deal with personnel matters, real estate transaction. All of those are executive session matters. Here it just more fully describes proprietary information. If universities are going to be engaged in trade secret development, i.e. trade secrets because of processes that are going to be commercialized, they have to be in a position to have a meeting without revealing the trade secrets that are being discussed. So that's the only thing that's directed at. And I think the universities, when they asked for that, they were very prudent. They weren't asking for anything more. They were just saying, if we're going to be engaged in commerce, if we're going to be enterprise universities, then we don't want to have open meetings where all of our trade secrets in terms of product development is going to be open to the public.
What about the internal audit discussion?
The internal audit discussion, I think, is, I don't know. I mean, that's going to be up to the legislature. I could argue that one either way, having been engaged in the audit process. When I used to have, if I'm not mistaken, and Jim, you might know better, when I was state auditor, I would do a lot of our post-audit meetings, and I don't think we kept them open to the public. I don't know if they're specifically exempt, but I don't think those were open to the public. And they were opportunities for me and the auditors involved to really discuss what went on in the audit. I don't think that they were an open meeting, but I might be wrong. So I didn't, when I saw that language that was being requested, I thought, well, that's fairly consistent with what we do now. But again, I'm not sure. Again, these are all part of opening the door to discussion, and that's still up on the table.
Was exemption from civil service ever on the table?